Hello, I'm Esther Gitu. It's Tuesday, October 25th. This is Africa 54.
Peace talks to end Ethiopia's devastating Tigray conflict are now officially underway in South Africa. Africa 54's digital innovation competition profile features Zimbabwe's Ryan Katayi and his startup Farmhut, an agri-tech company. And the United Nations urges international support to help fight Cameroon's cholera outbreak among refugees. All this and much more on today's Africa 54.
Talks between an Ethiopian government delegation and rival Tigray forces officially began on Tuesday in South Africa. These are the first formal peace talks since civil war erupted 2 years ago. The conflict has killed thousands, displaced millions, and left perhaps millions on the brink of famine. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
Negotiations between an Ethiopian delegation and Tigray representatives are underway in South Africa Tuesday and are expected to end on Sunday, according to a spokesperson for the South African President, Cyril Ramaphosa. The talks came after the Ethiopian military and their allies, which include troops from neighboring Eritrea, captured several large towns in Tigray in the past week. Hassan Kineji, the director of Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies, says there must be a commitment to a long-term solution, and the process needs to be as inclusive as possible.
It is important in part because the mediators have managed to get both parties to a negotiating table. To the extent that they've been able to get to that agreement is important. And it's likely then that we may perhaps see a ceasefire in the coming days.
The situation appeared to put Ethiopian government in a stronger position than its Tigray rival going into the talks.
The process needs to be as inclusive as possible to prevent the specter of spoilers actually destroying the entire process. Because previous attempts, not just in Ethiopia, but of similar processes, one thing that they've always left out is they've not been as inclusive, and therefore that ended up actually invalidating whatever agreement that may have been arrived at.
However, it was under pressure from foreign powers, including the United States and European Union, to halt its offensive. White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre on Monday commended South Africa for hosting the first formal peace talks of the conflict.
We call on the government of Ethiopia and the Tigrayan authorities to engage seriously in the AU-led talks to achieve an immediate cessation of hostilities, unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance to all Ethiopians in need.
The war is rooted in a power struggle between the federal government and Tigray authorities, who led the country's ruling coalition until Abiy Ahmed became prime minister. The Tigray People's Liberation Front dominated Ethiopia's ruling political alliance for decades before Abiy Ahmed took power in 2018 and sidelined the party. Fighting resumed in August, shattering a truce and halting humanitarian aid into Tigray, a region of 6 million people. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
For more on Ethiopia, I'm joined by Solomon Abate, VOA Horn of Africa Acting Chief. Solomon, welcome back to Africa 54.
Thank you, Esther. Good to be here.
Update us on what's happening, especially in the region of Tigray, even as the peace talks commence in South Africa.
The guns have not been silenced yet until I have arrived here in the studio, but the hope is that they would agree on some kind of cessation of hostilities. And what pushes me to say this is Recently, a few minutes ago, I received a letter from the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Mr. Musa Faki Mohammed. He said the chairman is for the statement issued by his office. The chairman is encouraged by the early demonstration of commitment to peace by the parties and to seek a lasting political solution to the conflict in the supreme interest of Ethiopia.
Now, as the international community continues, to ask for cessation of the war and the conflict in Ethiopia, that began, a year and a half ago now. What role are they playing now? What are they saying as the peace talks begin in South Africa?
Before the peace talks have begun, and even yesterday, the international community have been expressing support to this peace process. And also, they have been calling for immediate cessation of hostilities and serious engagement in these peace talks on of all parties in the peace talks. And also, they are calling for unhindered humanitarian access and the withdrawal of Eritrean troops from northern Ethiopia. This has been said by the White House, the Karine Jean-Pierre yesterday, and by State Department spokesperson Ned Price, and also almost I can say the entire Senate, starting with Senator Bob Menendez, wrote a letter before the start of the talks to Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, expressing their content with the fact that Ethiopia supports the peace process and called for all these points, including the cessation of hostilities. And European Union is involved, and AU, United Nations, is also involved.
Solomon, thank you always for the updates from the Horn of Africa.
You are welcome.
Solomon Abate is the VOA Horn of Africa Acting Chief. For more perspective on the Ethiopia talks, joining me live via Skype from Nairobi is William Davison, a senior analyst for Ethiopia with the International Crisis Group. Mr. Davison, welcome back to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Davison, the first question is the peace talks are ongoing, as we just had a short discussion here with my colleague. What are your expectations? What is the outcome likely to be from what you know?
I think the hope from the mediators and many other actors inside and outside Ethiopia is for a cessation of hostilities agreement here, as described. There is still active, ongoing fighting inside Tigray. The federal military and their Eritrean allies have made significant advances in recent days, over the last week or so. The federal government has stated its intention to control all federal facilities inside Tigray. And we do expect there to be continued resistance from Tigray's regional government and its forces to that federal ambition and to the Eritrean presence. So because there is this ongoing active conflict, the mediators, the African Union and their partners really face a challenge to get the parties to agree to a truce. And of course, it is only the federal and Tigray representatives at these talks. So even if they do agree to a truce, there is still the outstanding question of the response of Eritrea's government and its armed forces.
And that brings me to the question of, even as the peace talks continue, who is going to be held accountable for the millions or thousands of people who have been killed during this conflict?
That is very much an outstanding question. Of course, we have seen all sorts of atrocities during this conflict. Serious allegations, some of them essentially confirmed, against Eritrean troops, Ethiopian troops, massacres, sexual violence, looting inside Tigray, an allegation of ethnic cleansing against Amhara elements in western Tigray, and then reports of atrocities by Tigray's forces when they advanced outside of Tigray last year. So far, we have seen very little in the way of accountability, only promises of such by the federal and Tigray governments. And really because the international actors, whether journalists, humanitarians, or human rights investigators, they have essentially been blocked from any serious investigation of what has been going on during this war. So there's really not been enough evidence collected for any kind of international process, which of course those Ethiopian and Eritrean actors would resist anyway. So we know there has been mass suffering and atrocities, but we are a long way from accountability at the moment.
And very briefly, Davison, what's your interpretation of calling for peace talks while at the same time we've seen continued airstrikes and bombardment of areas in Tigray, including the capture of key cities in that region?
There is certainly signs here that the federal government particularly is taking a two-pronged approach. It is trying to achieve its objective of controlling all federal facilities inside Tigray militarily, whilst it is also engaging in the diplomatic process, the peace talks in South Africa. And that is what makes it so challenging to get to a cessation of hostilities, although that is, of course, incredibly necessary given the continued suffering we see inside Tigray and outside.
William, thanks. William Davison is a senior analyst for Ethiopia with the International Crisis Group. The Sudanese government blocked internet access nationwide on Tuesday as pro-democracy activists marked the first anniversary of a coup that derailed the transition to civilian rule, with hunger and inflation gripping the country. Blocking the internet is a regular tactic when mass protests are planned. Protesters defied authorities who have launched repeated deadly crackdowns on past rallies, chanting "power to the people" and demanding that soldiers go back to the barracks. Authorities in Khartoum ordered all public institutions, schools and businesses closed Tuesday as security forces deployed heavily across the city, blocking roads and bridges. At least 118 people have been killed while demanding a return to civilian rule, a condition for Western governments to resume critical and previously halted response to the coup. A new report from the global humanitarian organization World Vision highlights how spiraling food prices are contributing to the global hunger crisis and putting the world's most vulnerable children at increased risk of death. VOA's John Tanza, host and managing editor of the South Sudan in Focus radio program, spoke with World Vision policy advisor Hannah Chagin, who says Sudan is experiencing a serious food crisis.
There is a continued hunger crisis that is continuing to mount, and we're seeing this manifest most severely in countries in East Africa and in parts of Asia. And that's due really to a series of compounding factors, but really hunger is being driven by what we're calling the 3 C's: conflict, climate change, and the ongoing impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And really this plays out differently depending on the context, but those are the 3 really the main genres that you could categorize the hunger crisis in.
What are some of the, efforts by World Vision to mitigate that problem in a country difficult to access, having its own issues?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, just like you said, there's political instability, economic instability. We've seen poor harvests. I was just talking with a colleague in the Sudan region who was describing to me just the amounts of heavy rain and flooding that we've seen in the region since August that's going to disrupt the planting season and will definitely affect outputs of that harvest. But World Vision, we have a presence in hunger hotspots around the world. And as we began to see the size and scale of this global crisis, we felt the need to mobilize a global response declaration. And the goal of that response is to reach 22 million people in 25 specific countries, and Sudan is included in that. Our field teams have expertise in leadership and cash and food and nutrition programming, as well as being the largest implementing partner of the World Food Program. So in Sudan, we have 5 WFP partnerships, as well as a multi-sectoral response program focused on livelihoods interventions, primary health care, wash services, which is clean water, water sanitation services, and nutrition screening and treatments in South and East Darfur and Blue Nile.
That was VOA's John Tanza speaking with World Vision policy advisor Hannah Chagin. Lieutenant Abubakar Siddiqui Diakite, former top aide to Guinea's ex-military ruler Musa Dadis Camara, told a court on Monday that Camara planned and ordered the 2009 stadium massacre of more than 150 people. Diakite, sometimes known as Tomba, says that everything that happened at the stadium was prepared by President Dadis. In his testimony, Diakite gave details about how the massacre was allegedly planned. He says that 250 to 300 new military recruits, some armed with machetes and knives, were brought to Conakry by people close to Camara to infiltrate the demonstration. Diakite says that he tried to convince Camara to let the police handle the situation as it was unfolding, but that Camara was in a rage and gave orders to his men to crush the protesters. Ugandan police say 11 people were killed early Tuesday in a fire that ripped through a school for the blind. The disaster occurred at the Salama School in Mukono, southeast of Kampala. The cause of the fire remains unknown. 6 people have been admitted to a hospital and all are in critical condition, according to police. An investigation is underway into the cause of the blaze, but it is not known if the victims were all students at the school. Pakistan's information minister says the body of an outspoken Pakistani journalist who was killed by police while living in hiding in Kenya is being repatriated. A plane is expected to bring Ashad Sharif's body back to Pakistan Tuesday evening. Meanwhile, dozens of journalists rallied in Islamabad over killing of Sharif at a roadblock near Nairobi. Kenyan police are expressing regret over the incident, saying it was a case of mistaken identity during a search for a similar car involved in a case of child abduction. A spokesman for the demonstrators said they are demanding a thorough investigation into Sunday's killing of Ashad Sharif in Kenya.
The journalist community in Pakistan is demanding an immediate inquiry about the target killing of Arshad Sharif in Kenya. Many political parties are also supporting this demand. We want that the government of Pakistan must form a judicial commission to investigate the murder.
Sharif left Pakistan in July to avoid arrest over criticizing the country's powerful military. He was also a critic of the government of Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, who repeatedly says he believes in freedom of the media. Nairobi police say Sharif was shot in the head and killed Sunday night after the car he was in with his brother drove through a roadblock set up on the Nairobi-Magadi highway to check vehicles along the key route. Police say the two ignored orders to stop and sped up. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, the United Nations says international support is needed to fight a cholera outbreak in Cameroon. Stay with us.
The search is on for Africa's best and brightest minds in finance, cybersecurity, technology, and anything digital, making social impact through cutting-edge technologies, innovation, and creativity in Africa. Out of 17,000 candidates from 50 countries in North, Central, East, West, and Southern Africa, only 3 will be selected from the top 10 continental finalists from Egypt, Nigeria, Ghana, Zimbabwe, Kenya, and Cameroon. Join the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and its prestigious partners, including the Voice of America, when the 3 finalists are featured at the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit in December 2022 in Washington. Stay tuned.
In other news, Nigeria's Economic Crimes Commission says a court has ordered the final seizure of 2 properties and cars owned by former oil minister Daisien Alison Madueke. The seizure is related to allegations of graft. 6 South Sudanese students studying in Egypt are deported to Juba. 8 other students are awaiting deportation to South Sudan. The students are accused of beating an Egyptian police officer during a recent protest. And Zambian musician Mark Lukwesa, popularly known by his rap name Killer, recently became a global sensation following a TikTok collaboration with North American content creator and musician Connor Price that generated over 21 million views on TikTok. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce's U.S.-Africa Business Center is convening its first annual Africa Digital Innovation Competition for African startups. VOA is working as a media partner with the Africa Business Center on this initiative. The top 10 finalists have been chosen and bringing you a look at each one. And today we highlight Ryan Katayi from Zimbabwe, who started Farmhut, an agri-tech company that connects farmers with restaurants and businesses that are willing to buy in bulk to increase revenue for the farmers and save consumers money.
My name is Ryan Katayi. I'm aged 26. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Farmhut. By applying to this competition that was continental, it was a matter of us putting us on a bigger stage where we would actually see what the external environment thinks about what we're doing, and that validation also proving to us exactly the potential that we actually have. For us, it really meant a lot, especially with the morale of the team, given that, you know, it's like a stamp to be told that what you're doing qualifies of all the thousands that applied this year. But then to me personally, it meant that we were on the right path, and keeping on going on that path meant that, you know, we're meant for greater things that we also envision as well. So Farmhut is a business-to-business agri-tech startup that is focused on connecting farmers to retailers, restaurants, schools, and other companies. What we're doing is that we're ensuring that our farmers earn more, whilst also restaurants, retailers, and all this other business that we're supplying to are paying less. By so doing, we're ensuring that they have an increase in household incomes and also find better economic opportunities also through their farming businesses. Looking at the stories that we get from the farmers that we work with daily, and some of them even come to us after probably 3 months, some even a year, you'd get that it's not just about the money that they're getting through, but then, you know, we've actually improved their social lives. You know, now most of them can afford to even come to a rally, they can afford to access healthcare, and we work with more women than men. So you find that it's not an easy industry for a woman to be operating in, and having to be working with them, we've also noted that it has helped them a lot, especially when it comes to contributing economically to the country as well. If I'm the one who received the notification, it would be to tell my team. Obviously, my team is going to talk about us celebrating. Obviously, we're going to do that. But then I think I'm going to give tribute to my grandmother. She's the one person who really motivates me to wake up every day and keep doing what I'm doing. That will be the steps of what we do. Everything we do it as a team, because we believe, you know, we can't get anywhere without each other. So they're the first people that I would inform. Then I'll get personal with myself and be happy.
Wednesday on Africa 54 will profile Ghana's Frank Nana Adai and his startup Shopper. It's time for a health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with the latest news on efforts to combat cholera in Cameroon. Hello, Lino.
Hello everyone. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is urging international support to combat the cholera outbreak among refugees in Cameroon. The UN Refugee Agency says up to $250,000 is needed to increase access to clean water, improve waste management in the Minawao camp, and address other urgent needs. UNHCR says at least 2 people have died of cholera in the camp, which hosts thousands of Nigerian refugees in the country's far north region. For more insight, I spoke to Olivier Beer, the UNHCR representative in Cameroon.
We responded quite fast to this outbreak of cholera with our partners. The government, of course, but also the WHO and UNICEF and NGOs dealing with health in the refugee camp. So we managed to treat 53 out of 73 patients who are now back home. 40 patients last week, 73 this week. We hope now that figures will come down, but this is the situation as it is today. We have also disinfected 2,300 houses out of 3,500. So we are progressing with disinfection. We are progressing with bringing medication because there was a gap with regard to medication. And we are also disinfected public schools, public buildings where you have people gathering. What we are doing also is to sensitize refugees about waste management and the importance of using latrines when we have them. Because another gap that we have a gap of 900 latrines. You know, Minawawo refugee camp was designed at the beginning for 20,000 refugees maximum. But we had 30,000 and now we are at 75,000. But with the same budget that we had 5 years ago with 30,000 refugees. So it's much more challenging for us to respond to the needs of refugees across the border, food, health, education, etc.
How do you get more funding?
What we are trying to do is to advocate for humanitarian funding because you know, refugees are here for quite some time, not only the Nigerian, but also the Central African. And it's very difficult to get humanitarian funding for protracted refugee situation. But it does not mean that refugees are already able to fully take care of themselves. Why? Because these regions where usually are refugees are remote areas where development is also missing.
WHO adapted its strategy because there is a shortage of vaccines against cholera, going from 2 doses to 1 dose. Isn't that counterproductive? And isn't there a risk of this outbreak even growing further? How efficacious is a 1-dose vaccine?
To respond to cholera effectively, what I have seen, my experience is that you need a series of things to happen. The numbers of latrine, the numbers of medication, the numbers of the availability of potable water, waste management, sensitization, entrance, catheters, all these things. So what we need to do is to make sure that everything will be addressed, will be responded to, and then you can afford to have 1 dose of vaccine. You have sufficient health personnel that we don't have for the moment. When you have all these things in place, then yes, you can maybe afford to have 1 dose.
So how optimistic are you when you look at the current map in terms of solving all these issues at the same time?
I'm more optimistic because I've seen that for this particular outbreak, we managed to work all together. So if we are developing leadership, coordination, and we have enough resources, I'm very optimistic that this can be not only solved and responded to, but prevented, because floods are happening every year. We know the problems, we know the context in which we are living. We can, today in 2022, in a country like Cameroon, we can avoid cholera.
Finally, Mr. Olivier Béard, what is your message?
My message, of course, goes first to the relatives of the refugees who lost their lives, because as a UNHCR representative, I really feel sorry for these families and for the refugees. But at the same time, my message is to call on the donors, on everyone assisting us. Of course, I thank already for the support that we are getting.